Hello, everybody. My name is Gilda Ross. I am the Glenbard Student and Community Projects Coordinator. I'm so happy that you could join us on this beautiful day for this very important conversation. When Catherine Newman and I spoke months and months ago, I circled the calendar with anticipation, and now it's here, and I'm so glad you are here. Thank you to all of our sponsors who make this possible. You just saw the slide of our annual sponsors and those who share the programming. If you are new to Glenbard, welcome, and our ask of you is please share this resource with your families and friends across the street or around the country. Everybody is always welcome. And the website has all of our links, and then you'll be able to take a look at the brochure that lists our 50 programs in 3 languages. We are so excited, and hello, and we want Catherine to, she's suffering from a bit of laryngitis, but she's muddling through, and I'm so grateful for that. I'm also grateful to her that we will be able to share this recording afterwards, and I know when we are done, you will want to get on the phone or get on your computer and text everyone and let them know that this is happening again at 7 p.m. tonight. Before I turn things over to Josh Chambers, I'd like to tell you about what's upcoming in the next few weeks. Next week, we are welcoming Gina Beagle. Gina Beagle's curriculum is one that we use in our PE classes at Glenbard for well-being, and she'll be talking as a kickoff to our Live Life Well Week programming. Her topic is Taking the Good, Skills for Staying Positive, Reducing Stress, and Living Your Best Life. That's next Wednesday, again at noon and 7 p.m. And then one Live Life Well Week begins the following week. Josh Shipp will be returning. Josh has a program that is titled Every Child is One Caring Adult Away from Being a Success. His book is called Decode Their Behavior and Develop Their Trust. So Josh Shipp will be back. That's on the 25th, Thursday at noon and 7 p.m. And then closing out the month, we have Dr. Ayoma Iruka. This is one of our early childhood programs. She will be in communication and in conversation with 2 very important past speakers, Dr. June Lee of Harvard's Early Childhood Programming and the Fred Rogers Institute, and then NPR reporter Micheline Duclef is the author of the book Hunter-Gatherer Parent. So those people will be in conversation. If you have a young child or know someone who works with young children, they'll want to know about the program on the 28th. So without further ado, I'm so happy that Josh Chambers can be here. Josh is our Assistant Superintendent of Human Services for Glenbard to do the honor of the introduction. Please take it away, Josh.
Thank you so much, Gilda. I have to say, one of the things that I enjoy as an employee of Glenbard District 87 is the ability to interact with our GPS speakers. This is an incredible program, and I think that the fact that we are able to put these out there for our families, but also for the broader community, just means so much. So today I'm honored to introduce Dr. Catherine Newman. She is the Secretary of Creative Writing at Amherst College. She's a columnist and a prolific writer. She has written about kids, parents, teenagers, food, cooking, loss, relationships, crafts, etiquette, and travel for major magazines, newspapers, and online publications, including the New York Times and the Boston Globe. She is the author of several popular young adult novels, and her just-released first novel for adults, We All Want Impossible Things, has been received with much critical acclaim. We are delighted to host her to discuss 2 of her very informative books titled How to Be a Person, 65 Hugely Useful, Super Important Skills to Learn Before You're Grown Up, and What Can I Say? A Kid's Guide to Super Useful Social Skills. As a parent of 4 children, I am very excited to have you join me in welcoming Dr. Catherine Newman to today's GPS.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you so much. Thank you, Gilda, Jerica, and thank you all for coming. I'm so thrilled to see so many of you here. So let me, that was such a nice introduction. Also, nobody ever calls me Dr. Catherine Newman, so I love that. And my kids only say it to make fun of me. Okay, let me share my screen. So this is called, we'll know when I get there. Okay, 8 social skills to make your life better for kids and their parents. And there were 10 social skills to make your life better, but then I was really worried about my voice. But anyway, we'll see how it goes. I wrote an etiquette column for Real Simple magazine for 10 years. And I raised 2 kids. I'm still raising them, but they're 23 and almost 20. And I'm drawing on strategies that I learned from both of those experiences for this presentation. I've done a lot of thinking about how people develop empathy and compassion so that they can be in meaningful, harmonious relationships. And that is what this is about, relationships. So with that goal in mind, what are the social skills our kids need? The goal being meaningful, harmonious relationships. And how do we help them have those skills? So this is kind of a two-sided presentation. On the one hand, how do we talk to kids about the skills? And on the other hand, how do we practice them ourselves? We're going to model them. You always hear about modeling, but that's how we're going to do it, right? We're going to use these skills in our relationships with our kids. This is the cover of my most recent book for kids called What Can I Say? And most of the content is the kid content is coming out of this book. The illustrations are by Debbie Fong, who's an amazing illustrator. So on the one hand, I want to talk about cultivating the skills in our kids. What kind of language do we use when we talk about our relationships? And also, how do we practice these skills, we, the parents, in our relationships with our kids? Because the truth is, we're not just modeling skills, we're improving our relationships with our kids when we practice these really important social skills. And of course, we know them, but still to be really deliberate about it. So not modeling in the sense of like parading around our ability to listen or be caring. It's the deep sense of showing our kids what it feels like to be on the receiving end of attentive social behavior. So these are more of the deep skills and habits, which I think is what we call emotional intelligence. And it's a little more of that versus the nitty gritty, like how do you write an email? Although I think those skills are also very important, and there's lots of those in the book, but we're going to be looking a little deeper. Mostly you need to remind your kids to read their email, especially if they're applying to college. Just going to drop that in there, just file that away. If your kids are neurodivergent, some of these skills will need to be adapted, and you will likely already know what you're doing with that. This is the first skill, and it's really a habit, a practice, and it is look up. And that means put your phone down. And I'm just going to read this little part of it from the illustration. This is very specifically in a section about how we greet people, but it has a slightly deeper resonance. Why you say hi to someone is to acknowledge that you're in the same space, either actually or virtually, but how you do it depends a little bit on the context. In any case, you'll want to be friendly, of course, and make eye contact, although eye contact expectations vary across cultures. So looking up from their phones, if your kids are on their devices, you already know how challenging this one is. We really want it for them. We really want them to engage with the here and now people in front of them. We want them to greet people, their friends at school, their grandparents who are visiting, the person selling them a pack of gum. We want them to engage with people, to look people in the face in real life, as we say. But I'm sure I'm not alone in feeling that I have to remind myself of this too. So there's a lot of urgent feeling around our devices. and it's kind of a false urgency, if you know what I mean, that everything always feels very pressing. And just as an aside, my daughter was watching me put an out of office on. We were going on vacation. I'm in publishing, and she saw me write, like, if this is an emergency. And she was like, if it's an emergency, they should be calling 911. Like, stop with the emergency. And I felt like, yeah, that's so true. Like, there's not really a publishing emergency. I'm not in a field with lots of emergencies. However, you know that urgency around the devices. So when my kids were younger, I made a real conscious practice, and I really had to be conscious about it. When they got home from school, I put my phone down or closed my laptop. I used to just remind myself to say, I'm so glad you're home. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so happy to see you. Whatever the thing was, to just really connect with them. And my kids, who are older now and love to reflect on all the things we did right and wrong as parents, which kind of cracks me up. But one of the things they just said to me, which really almost made me cry, is you were always so happy to see us. And I feel like, you know, that's a massive compliment to me that they felt that way. I'm so glad. Okay, skill or habit. Number 2, express curiosity. You're going to see these are all very intertwined. And that means ask questions and pay attention. And again, I'm sure you're seeing this the way this is something we want our kids to do. And it's also something we need to do, get in the habit of doing well. So on the one hand, super helpful to teach kids really concrete strategies for expressing curiosity. A lot of kids, part of why I wrote a second book is that when I wrote the book, How to Be a Person, the kids who wrote me wanted more social skills. And a lot of the skills they wanted were like conversation skills, almost small talk skills, but often just straight up conversation. How do you have a conversation with people? And so we came up with these kind of, my kids and I came up with these questions of just basic conversation starters. How do you express curiosity about somebody? You ask them a question. And these are the types of questions. I don't know if you've ever practiced this. We did when the kids were little. We filled a jar with slips of paper with questions on them. And the kids and I and their dad generated all these questions. And every night at dinner, we would pluck one out and talk about it till the conversation ran dry, and then pluck a different one. And it's a very, I mean, you can buy kits like that. It's not rocket science, but it's a really good practice. And also, it's not just practice. You actually learn a lot about your kids from these conversations, and they learn a lot about you. And if you think about how much people want to be asked about themselves, like my daughter used to fill out American Girl quizzes in the magazine, the American Girl doll magazine, and there were quizzes, and she would fill them out in pencil and erase them and fill them out. And I feel like, and she still does BuzzFeed quizzes, you know, what taco filling would you be if you could be a taco filling, is like what it turns out to be. And I feel like it comes down to this deep, deep desire to be known. And I think that's a very human desire. We want to feel known, and our kids want to feel known by us. And so we want to lean in with our curiosity. And I don't just mean the questions. And again, I say this from a place of having asked a billion of these questions, but not the what did you do at school today questions, or questions like, did you get your homework done? Those are not curious questions. Those are ways you express your concern about your kids. That's a really different type of question, and also an appropriate type of question, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the questions that are just like, who are you? What do you care about? What do you like in the world? What do you think about? How do you feel like people should behave? Big questions, small questions. And when my kids were little, we used to play something we called the picking game. And I think a lot of families play a version of this, but we did it with the IKEA catalog, and we would sit on the couch, and everyone on every page would have to like say what they would get from that page if they could get anything in the world. And it was, on the one hand, just super pointless. Like we weren't buying things from IKEA. But on the other hand, just this way of kids feeling seen and becoming accustomed to the give and take of curiosity. Who were we? Who were they? And you know what it's like when you spend time with people who have not gotten that need met. You can feel like you are shoveling into a really deep hole. I don't know if you know what I mean, but that it's like if you go on a date with somebody who just needs to talk about themselves for 2 hours. I mean, I haven't dated in 35 years, but I still remember this experience of someone who just has not had the need met of somebody being curious about them and paying attention, and that need will show up again. That said, if kids are talking about something that's not a shared interest, I think it's fine to cue them. My kids used to narrate video games, like tell me about video games in such mind-boggling detail. And I had like less than no interest in this. And at some point I might say, is there something else you'd be interested in talking about? Because I've kind of hit my limit with this. So I also, we can cue each other about the kinds of conversations we want to have with our kids. Okay, the next skill, habit, strategy is to really listen. Again, really obvious, really hard to practice. And to think about what it feels like when someone really listens to you. I'm not going to read this is actually from the book, How to Be a Person. Again, a section on conversation, but I'll just read this little squib at the top here. When the other person is speaking, you can show that you're listening by making eye contact, nodding, asking follow-up questions, and saying back what you hear them say. And, these are just teachable, learnable skills for kids. What does it look like to listen well? Well, that's some of it. And we are called on so constantly to listen to our kids. They have so much to say, some kids more than others, but I mean, you can actually feel like the time between them getting home and them going to bed, or you going to bed if they're older, is just like a wall of them talking. But there's all kinds of listening that's involved. They might be telling you a made-up story about like their pretty pony and her name was Ganga Banga and she was the prettiest pony, and you might ask questions, or you might be listening to them tell you a story that has an understory, and you're only knowing it because you're listening really well and you see them twisting a napkin in their hand, or you're listening to some troubles. There's just so many kinds of listening. And Tina Brayson, who's probably been here and visited with you, somebody I love, she's co-author of the book, The Power of Showing Up. She once told me that 50 years of science and research point to the single most important factor in predicting how happy kids will grow up to be is just being present. And I think about that a lot. And she said, this was just something she said to me in conversation. She said, you don't need to do a million things. You can make mistakes, but just show up. What your kids need is authentic, flawed, present you. And that was that's been a real touchstone for me. Listening is how we feel empathy. You feel empathy because you're paying attention to how somebody else feels, and you're doing that by listening and by paying attention. And it's also how we demonstrate empathy. When somebody understands that we've been listening, they feel that we care about them. And, bonus, like that's how our kids have self-esteem, is we listened to them. They are somebody whose words carry meaning and importance in the world. And that's huge for kids, obviously. That said, again, we're really distracted. We're kind of culturally distracted. We have a million things we're supposed to be doing at all times. And so I have a couple just quick and dirty practices. One thing I got in the habit of saying, if I knew I wasn't going to be able to listen, is, can you hold that thought and tell me over dinner? Or can you come back to me in 10 minutes with that? I just want to finish what I'm doing, but I really want to pay attention to what you're saying. And the other thing is a little more like abstract, hoovy groovy, but I used to use the words in my head that I was tethering myself, that I was roping myself to the ground so I didn't fly off like a distracted helium balloon. I would still myself to pay attention. And I used to just say it like a mantra. It doesn't need to be tether yourself, but something that reminds you that everything is at stake in paying attention. Okay, this is another practice that is just an every relationship improver. Give everyone the benefit of the doubt. And you know what this means, but your kids might not. It means offer the most positive interpretation of someone's behavior. Again, something I am actively practicing as much as I can. I'm going to read all the text on this slide just because this is exactly what this is. When you give someone the benefit of the doubt, it means you assume they're doing their best. Okay, how important is that, right? And you lean toward the most positive interpretation of their situation or behavior. Maybe a person seems unfriendly, but really they're just shy. Maybe someone who suddenly acts weird is going through something hard you don't know about. Let's say your friend texts to cancel a plan at the last minute. When you don't give them the benefit of the doubt, you might feel bad. We call this hurting your own feelings. That's an expression in my family where like your feelings get hurt, but actually who hurt them was you. And you might make them feel bad too. When you give someone the benefit of the doubt, you assume they have a good reason or that something's going on. Assuming the best about people means that everyone has a little more space to make mistakes and be imperfect. And there's a little caveat, but if someone keeps doing something that hurts or upsets you, then it might be time to change your expectations about what that person has to offer. And in the example that Debbie and I generated, a kid is saying, I can't walk diesel with you today. Ugh, I knew you secretly hated my dog. That's not the benefit of the doubt. And then the benefit of the doubt looks like this. I can't walk diesel with you today. Is everything okay? Yeah, but my bike tire is flat and I can't get over there. Want to walk and meet halfway. That would be great. So besides that it's compassionate, it also reminds you that you don't know everything about everybody. And I'm just going to show a different image here. You maybe have seen this image. I love it so much. An artist, Hazel Mead, made it, and it's actually part of a very wide image, and it's all people standing at a bus stop. And this person's wondering what to have for lunch. This person is feeling suicidal. You wouldn't know from looking. This person's running late for class. This person got a job interview. These folks are newly married. This person's on a blind date. And I love this reminder, this visual reminder that you can't tell from looking what other people are going through or why they're behaving the way they're behaving. And if you do remember that, you're more likely to practice empathy and compassion. And I remember my kids, like, I would be so mad driving. I'm not a great driver myself, ironically. And I would be so frustrated. Someone would cut me off and I'd be like, oh, that guy's such a jerk. And they would always say, like, maybe this is the first time that person's taken a car out on their own. Like, you don't know anything about that person. And it is such an important reminder. And then in terms of our kids, it's really important to remember that even though we know them so well, we don't really know what's going on with them all the time. And I remember one time my son was playing chess with my dad, and he was like 8, and he was sort of spacing out, and I was giving him a hard time, when you're like, hey, grandpa's playing chess with you, like sit up, whatever, just kind of needling him. And it turned out he had pneumonia. I mean, right? Like classic, don't know what you're dealing with, don't know what other people are going through. And I filed it away as like a real learning moment. Like my kid was really sick and I didn't even know it. So it might turn out that your kids are tired, they're sick, they need a snack, or there's something else going on. And when they were babies, we always gave them the benefit of the doubt. Do you remember this? There was like What to Expect the First Year, or that book. And it was like, oh, if your baby was crying, there was a checklist. It was like, were they in a wet diaper? Were they hungry? Were they overheating in the like 15 sweaters you put them in? And I sort of feel like we should still be doing that, like with our kids and maybe really with everybody, that we think, what's going on with this person? And maybe we say out loud, what do you need? And when my kids were little, we used to say, if they were sort of just really upset about little things or falling apart, we used to sometimes say, hey, do you need a little special attention? And sometimes they did. And they could just say, yeah, I do. And we would rock them, or my husband would roll them up in a blanket like a burrito. And we still say it. He says it mostly to me now. If I'm acting like a jerk, he says, do you need a little special attention? And yeah, I need to be rolled up like a burrito in a blanket. Okay, here's a skill, a pretty basic one. Get good at compromising. Easier said than done. Meeting in the middle. So this is a great thing to talk about with kids, because kids are used to talking about compromising when they're in trouble, if you know what I mean, where it's like, you have to share that, you have to take turns, whatever. And usually it's coming in as like in the middle of a problem. I think it's worth talking about sort of as a separate conversation when there's not an issue at hand, just talking to them about what compromise is and why it matters. And the text here is, when you compromise with someone, you meet each other halfway. This was just me being goofy. Skip that part. Visualize it as taking a step towards someone else's idea at the same time as they're taking a step toward yours. And the Venn diagram is a great way to think about compromise, right? You're not going to get everything you want. That person's not going to get everything they want. Where is there the most overlap? Is one way to think about it. Or picking a middle option. These are all just different ways to think about what a compromise is and what it looks like. And so again, to turn it back to us, like, what does it look like for us to practice compromising with our kids? And again, you might feel like you're compromising all the time. Like you really want to just be reading the paper in bed with a mug of coffee, and you're never doing that. So like, excuse me, you don't really need to compromise anymore. But the truth is, our kids don't always feel it. They don't always feel that we're compromising. They have so little power in so many ways. They don't get to make a lot of the biggest decisions that affect them. So I think it's worth us really compromising when we can, and really attending to the opportunities to compromise. And one thing that is sort of different from how I was raised is that my parents, who were amazing parents, but they had a very like, it's what I said, it's what I stand by. This was like, if they said it, it was done, and there was no further conversation. And I think the risk of loss with that, and I get it, right? It's like you're setting a firm boundary, a firm limit, everything's not negotiable. I get it. But what you risk giving up is a practice of flexibility. And it's a practice you actually want your kids to share. You want to see your kids be flexible. You don't want to see them locked down around everything. You want them to say, oh, okay, I was really intent on this, but I'm really hearing that it matters to you to do it a different way. So really tried to get in the habit when my kids were growing up of hearing when things mattered, when I had said no to something, and tuning into sort of what case they were making. So maybe I said, you said you were going to be home at 10 and they want to come home at midnight, and we would compromise on 11 because they would explain to me why it mattered. And I think it's important to be attentive and flexible, and to remember that these are relationships that are always growing and changing, and our kids are growing and changing too. And our compromising, our reminding ourselves to compromise helps us attend to that fact. This is not the child of a year ago or a month ago or a week ago. This is a person in this moment who's growing and changing. Okay. Skill number 6, this is just a really hard practice. Remember that other people are different from you, right? I mean, like, duh, and that's a good thing, that other people are different from you. And this one, the illustrations about arguing well, which is a skill I think is that's really useful for kids, how to like resolve disagreement. But this idea that people are different from you, in the Real Simple Etiquette column, I would say that 90%, maybe 100% of etiquette questions come down to people's otherness, right? That people don't think the way you think, and they don't do things the way you do them. And that is because they're different from you, because they're culturally different from you, because they practice a different religion, because they value different things, because they have different taste from you. So people did not like their neighbor's wind chimes. They did not like the fact that their daughter-in-law did Thanksgiving as a potluck. It was just all of these questions all the time that were really masquerading as judgments of people's differences, right? I don't like the fact that this person does this different from the way I do it. And guess what? They do those things because they're different from you. And it is just really hard to deal with. It's also what makes the golden rule a little tricky, if that's something you talk about with your kids, right? The golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do to you. A little tricky because actually the thing you would want someone to do for you might be different. Which is why my kids used to always talk about the platinum rule. I don't know if you're familiar with the platinum rule, but the platinum rule is like, do unto other people the thing you think would make them happiest, which is a little different. So I think this is one of those cases where it's worthwhile to have both practical and philosophical conversations with your kids about this fact. What is the right way to behave to make our relationships fair and good? How do you live in a world with other people? How do you balance their needs with your own? These are really, really fundamental questions, right? This is like, it comes up in your kid's life because a person they don't particularly like wants to sit at their lunch table, right? What do you do about that? How do you balance the fact that that person wants to be there with the fact that you don't really want them to? These are really deep, important questions and really important conversations to have. And then it's also important to think about within the family, right? you want this, I want that. What do? You problem solve instead of battling everything out. And we do the same with them, ideally. We remember that our kids are different from us. And the person I run with every day is a therapist, which, by the way, is really a great thing to have in a running partner. And she used to always say to me, your relationships are more important than being right. And like, one of those obvious things that kind of blows your head, that really just blew my mind. I had to zoom in on this. Think to as a way to sort of be with other people. Think to yourself, maybe I'm wrong, and try saying it out loud. This is a skill I started developing when I turned 50 years old. So it's kind of a lot to ask of our kids, but I'm asking it. I think it's a really important thing to say and believe. I might be wrong about this. I'm so sure I'm right about what needs to happen, what you need to do, what the next thing is, but maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm wrong. Here's another lovely, obvious practice of being your most generous self. But the subheading here is asking, what can I do to help? And the book, we're not really talking about chores in this presentation, although Gilda and I did talk about that in our call. But in the book, How to Be a Person, there's a lot about cultivating an attitude of helpfulness, that your basic, the way you move through the world with other people is with a kind of helpfulness attached to you. So I have a thing about volunteering, even though that's not exactly what I'm talking about with kids, but it's related, and I'll just read the first part of this. When you volunteer to do something, you are basically saying to another person or your school or community, what can I do to help? Or I'd be happy to. Then you do something that benefits more people than just yourself. So cultivating in our kids an openness to being helpful, having a kind of availability to other people, an attitude of I'd be happy to. And we hope our kids demonstrate this almost more than anything else, right? Someone is in tears on the playground, you hope your kid is the kid that rushes over and says, what do you need? Or maybe your mom just dropped a bag of flour on the kitchen floor. Yes, this is me, and is like in there swearing and losing her mind. And you go in and you say, should I get a mop or a broom? What would be most helpful? What can I do to help? And this is where I part company with some parenting folks who worry correctly about parents helping too much. And I think that's a legitimate concern. And I am all for kids needing to struggle. Kids do need to struggle to learn to do the things they need to learn to do. Your kid is going to sit on the floor trying to tie their shoe while the calendar pages fly off the wall. That has to happen. I get it. You can't just go and tie their shoe every time. That said, when there were things that I could help with, I helped, and that meant a lot of different things in a lot of different life moments with my kids. It meant concrete helping, right? Like the kid who's going to help me with the flower, if they make a huge mess while they're making their grandfather a Valentine's Day card and say, do you have a minute to help me clean this up? I kind of lost track of time. I'm not going to say well, you should have kept track of time better, or you're the one who made the card. I'm the person who really is going to expect them to help me in a similar situation. I'm going to try to say, I'd be happy to. So this is a little bit of a place where different people have different ideas. And I have made myself available to make my kids' lives easier when I could. And I expected them to do the same for me. And a slightly deeper thought about this is that I don't expect my kids to be independent. And what I mean by that is not that I don't expect them to live apart from us. It's that I expect that they will always be mutually dependent with the people in their lives and in their homes. I don't expect them to move out into the world and struggle alone. I don't wish that for them. So I never thought that I was trying to train them to be that person who could just do everything on their own. I assume that they will be mutually dependent on their family members and friends and their community. So that's a conversation maybe for a different time. Okay, this is the 8th of 8. This is not a skill. This is just a statement of fact. You will make mistakes. That's okay. You can apologize and move forward. I'm going to read this. This is actually from an adaptation of one of the books, which was called How to Be a Mensch. We did a kind of like specifically Jewish version of this book, but this is not an especially Jewish concept. How to apologize. If something you did hurt somebody else, take responsibility for it and apologize, even if you didn't mean to do it or say it or cause any harm. Imagining the other person's feelings is called empathy, and it's super, super helpful to experience and to express. And this kid is saying, I'm so sorry we broke your glass manatee, Mom, especially when you'd already asked us not to play hockey in the house. It must be so annoying that we kept playing and then broke something you cared about. And the mom is graciously saying, thank you, sweetie. That's okay. Honestly, it always kind of gave me the creeps anyway. So apologizing is a huge and important social skill. We know what it feels like at every level when people don't take responsibility. We know what it feels like when Putin, says the Ukrainians had it coming. We know exactly what it feels like when at every level from government down, there's not accountability. And so we really want our kids to learn to apologize, to take responsibility, to care about people's feelings. And we also want to apologize to our kids. And I think it's one of the most underrated parenting skills, which is apologizing meaningfully to our kids when we do wrong by them. And it's one of the ways they feel understood and valued by us. And our kids now, as young adults, will occasionally launch into these critiques of their own childhoods, which there are other people here with grown kids, but we call this the catalog of grievances, where they just have like these stored up like things that were done wrong to them. And they're very funny about it. They're very aware that they had happy, privileged childhoods, but it's a really great opportunity to listen and for us to own that we did not know what we were doing. Always. We did our best, but we sometimes hurt them. And we can apologize and, for whatever injuries they've sustained. And it reminds, I think, being in the habit of apologizing when your kids are little and continuing that kind of conversation as they get older. Again, it's a reminder that we're in evolving relationships and that we're always building trust. And second to love itself, I think trust is the most important thing we've got going for us in our relationships with our kids. And anything we can do to amplify it, that's what we should be doing. And that is the end of my formal presentation. I'm going to stop the share here.
Catherine, that was one important conversation. You really touched on all the things that we try to talk about in a program like an ongoing series like this. How can we be our best self? How can we help our children be their best selves? And if we could follow these 8 simple habits or rules, we would really be there. So, oh yes, the love is coming in. Let's go to some questions, Catherine. So first up, we have Isabel. Isabel, take it away.
Hi, thank you so much for that amazing presentation. My name's Isabel and I'm a senior at Mattia Valley High School. And these are amazing skills for everyone. So how can I best share these suggestions with my friends who are struggling with their own communication skills?
Let me think. So you're asking about practicing these skills in friendships or communicating these skills to your friends?
Kind of communicating these to my friends.
I mean, I think I would say to you the thing I'm saying to the parents, which is, I think that practicing the skills is probably the best way to communicate them, you know, the way you just are in the kinds of, there's a saying, I'm just thinking about that saying that's like, behave as if you're always already in the relationship you want to be in, that you just do your part of it. And I think that goes a really long way towards kind of resetting like the norms in a community.
Good.
Great, thank you so much.
That at all? I don't know. I really appreciate the question though. It's a really hard question. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks, Isabel. Thank you, Catherine. Ria, you are up next.
Thank you for that great presentation. I certainly learned a lot today. So I'm Ria, I'm a junior at Mattia, and my question was, what's the one thing that you wish students knew more about when talking with each other and like in communicating with adults?
I feel like, you know, when I just think about all the things that I just was talking about, like, I do feel like paying attention just in a really fundamental way is sort of at the heart of all of it. I mean, I don't know if you're asking about something more specific, but I feel like that kind of deep listening and really connecting and really putting that kind of person to person relationship first, I guess for me, it's that. So it's not so much a specific, I don't know, maybe that's so abstract. Does that not get at it?
Yeah, that makes sense. It just like keeps a connection between them going.
Yeah. Thanks, Ria.
Thanks, Ria. Nina, you are up next.
Oh, thanks. So I really love this, every minute of it, and I love your positivity. I was wondering if you had a suggestion for a parent if you just can't get your child to talk, if they're coming home from school and how was the day, etc. Fine, and you're just getting one-word answers. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah. I think that's really challenging. And I mean, the thing I would say about that is also to remember, you know, it's all fine for me to be like, I remember it all so fondly, but I mean, our kids went through a lot of phases, and I'm especially remembering like middle school being a really tough time and a quiet time. And I used to have just weird tricks. I'm just going to call them tricks. It's funny. I'm self-conscious because Isabel and Ria are here, and I don't want to be like, everybody's tricking you into talking. But like there were times, I don't know if other parents do this, but like when you're driving and the kids are in the car, and because you're not making eye contact, it's this incredibly freeing time. I feel like they'll often talk because you're not just like deeply looking at them and trying to, probe into their very soul. And so I used to often feel like when my kids had something to say, I would drive them somewhere and see if I could shake it out of them. And almost anything like that, like shucking corn, I always thought was this like amazing, because you're not looking up and you're not staring at them. And so for all of my thing about making lots of eye contact, sometimes there are times, I think, with young people where that is not the best way to connect, and where they need a little bit of space and a little bit of room to come towards you. Just that, like giving them a little bit of room to come forward. But it's really hard. I mean, I remember being like, I can't believe like I'm never going to hear from this person again, but it's always just a phase, is how I feel.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Thank you.
Catherine, talk about role modeling in the way all of these concepts are so important. Is it role modeling that we're talking about? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the way I'm trying to use role modeling in this context, I think sometimes we talk about role modeling and the modeling part of it is very present, where it's like, as if you're like walking down a runway, like this is how you're like, bring food to the neighbors. And this is how you ask somebody how they're feeling. And that's all very important. But this is the kind of modeling that is really about the relationship itself. So you're not just showing your kids, how you use these skills. Your kids end up feeling what it's like to be in a relationship with these skills because you're practicing them in relationship.
My takeaway from my 7 pages of notes here about being in the moment, when they walk in the door, your face shines up. I love the way you said, still yourself and just understand this is one moment. And that moment doesn't have to be 24 hours a day of those moments, but when you are with them, that they need to feel that they are as important as possible. Talk about when you are angry with your child and how do I best handle that?
That is not where I thought that question was going. It's funny. Okay. Let me not answer a question you didn't actually ask, but
answer the question. Let's go there. Okay.
Well, what I thought you were going to say, the funny flip side of all of this is I also did a lot of, I had this other theory when my kids were growing up, where I felt like I was going to either try to pay a lot of attention to them or sort of leave them alone to do their own thing. The thing I hated as a kid and that I really tried not to do as a parent was be like half paying attention all the time. So I was a very all in or all out. My kids did a ton of stuff on their own. And then I did a lot of stuff with them, but those were kind of very, and then, of course, there's tons of great. It's not like it was all that. Like then I'm cooking and they're talking to me, whatever. But I was just going to note that it wasn't like I was paying attention to them all the time. They played alone for a huge, the bulk of their childhoods was my 2 kids playing with each other. So I was just going to say that. And anger, I feel like, is almost like a completely different. It's so... there's a chapter in What Can I Say about how to be angry. And I feel that it is a practice like any communication practice, where if you practice all the skills of good listening, good faith, respect, like you get to be angry and express your anger. But in all of their responsible ways. Not that I haven't just fully been angry and then apologized, or been angry in a irresponsible way and then apologized, but that I think that the anger itself, totally healthy, totally worth expressing. And then it's just like, how do you express it where you are simultaneously expressing your love and respect for the person you're talking to.
You know, that makes me think about, you know, so many of our speakers will talk about the importance of helping your child understand the full range of emotions that we have, but the importance of naming it and being specific. I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I'm disappointed, I'm envious, and then naming it and telling someone about it. So you're just reminding me about that. Here's a question. I have an only child and quiet, like one-word answers. How do I get him engaged to talk more, spend more time with us rather than being on his phone, communicating digitally?
Phones are just, I'm not an apologist for phones. I think they're really hard to manage. I think kids think that they know what's best. And I think a phone is like any addictive substance. I don't think kids can handle making decisions about their own phone use, to be honest. Our kids didn't get, you will not believe this now. It's going to make it sound like we raised our kids in prehistory, but our kids did not get phones till they were in 10th grade. I realize that is not the norm. It wasn't even the norm then. And then we had rules about phone use because the phones were so addictive. So that's again a slightly separate conversation about sort of how to deal with the very addicting, very compelling sort of dopamine rush devices. Like, what do we do about that? But in terms of conversation or spending time, we played a lot of board games and really got into it, like as a family. And I feel like if there was a type of game that your kid liked to play that you would be willing to learn, I think that's a great kind of connection. One thing I love about games is that they're explicitly pointless. And so spending time gaming with a kid, you're just saying, I have absolutely no agenda here but my time with you. We're not running errands. I'm not secretly trying to make sure you're like a violin maestro or whatever. We're doing a fully pointless thing that has like no value. I love that. And maybe it's like Minecraft. I never learned video games, but my husband did, and to play with the kids, and I feel like great. Like, I think that's another just avenue, whatever the avenues are where there's something that they want to do, might be willing to do with you. I think it's really worth pursuing.
One of our recent speakers talked about sitting around with your children, making up a list of the things that they like to do, and then having that ready on hand. But I love the board games.
It's a great idea.
What do you want to say about self-compassion for parents?
Oh, I mean, you have to forgive yourself. There were times in my parenting where I would go to bed. I remember this, like when my daughter was 3, I remember doing this, and I remember doing it again when she was 13. I remember going to bed and thinking, I'm going to start fresh tomorrow. Tomorrow's going to be a new day. And it was really hard. And there were times where it was so challenging and I felt like I was screwing it up so badly. And I had to just keep like resetting and reconnecting and apologizing and talking to my friends. I think it's really important to forgive yourself as you would forgive others. No, I'm sorry. But to forgive yourself and just know that it can be so mind-bogglingly hard to raise kids. And chances are pretty good you're doing your best, and you're not probably doing your best all the time, and that's okay too.
Mhm. I heard a recent expression, and this is what I say to myself at night sometimes when I fall asleep: don't stumble over what's behind you. And I try to remind myself of that. We were just talking about social media. On March 7th, Devorah Heitner has a new book coming out. Her second book, first one was called Screenwise. So come back and we'll be talking about this a lot. When I talked about loving the child in front about or hoped for or expected, but loving the child in front of you, what does that mean to you as we spoke about that?
Yeah, I mean, I was telling you earlier that, I write books for a living, and I have a son that doesn't read. As an example of this, and I just absolutely adore him. And one of the ways actually that he called me on my sort of not appreciating his being different from me. He's an incredible piano player. And at some point he was like, what if I just expected you to play the piano? Because it's what I do. And I was like, oh, touche. So yeah, their kids, they are different from us. Again, I think that is the most, they're so close to you, as there's no one you're closer to. And then it's really shocking to find that they're different from us. And yeah, that's who that person is. And you are just really along for the ride. That's how I feel.
And you were listening because you listened so well, and you heard him and he got you. I love that. I love that. Thank you so much.
I just want to say, being made fun of is my love language. I love to be mocked by my children. It's very
That's good. That's good. I bet they enjoy that.
Christine Kim is asking, she says, curious if there's any strategies when kids only listen to one parent who is more authoritarian but does not hear or do and respect what the other parents say. That's a great question, and I think is a problem in a lot of households. And the thing I would say about that, which is probably something you already know, but that is a problem, I feel like, for the parents to resolve with each other. That I think the parent who is more authoritarian would be very helpful for that parent to defer to the other parent very deliberately in conversation, or for that parent to get in the habit of saying, hey, why don't we see what dad thinks? Let's check in with dad, because I'm not really, I want to make sure that we're hearing his voice in this conversation. That's what I would do in that situation.
But this really, Catherine, is really a talk for the times. It's really wonderful. And I'm just so glad you're here with us today. I love your very specific, and I'm hearing from people who are emailing me, very specific things for parents as well as children. What brought you to this conversation? What brought you to this book?
Well, this book, a couple things brought me to this book. I love talking about communication, and that partly comes from doing that etiquette column for so long. But the reason I did that etiquette column for so long was that I already loved talking about it. So I also wrote a column for parents for a while, and about communicating with teenagers. And that was a column I wrote with my own kids. And I've thought a lot about communication skills. I'm a writer by trade, so I'm inherently in the field. And then, like I was saying, after the How to Be a Person book came out, and kids mostly wrote for two reasons. They wrote to send me a video of themselves making a quesadilla. I got like 65 videos of kids making quesadillas. I was thrilled every time. Or they wrote to say, can you do another book that's more communication skills? That kids wanted to hear I want to know what to talk to my grandma about. I want to know how to ask someone out on a date. I want to know what to say to a friend who's ghosting me. There were so many questions. So that is why I was thinking about the book. But then on the other hand, I've also done just tons of writing for and about parents. So this thinking about them together is like very much the way I am.
What do you think is the biggest mistake you made personally in raising your teenagers while they were teenagers? And you didn't have this perspective that you and I just spoke about now seeing them as young adults. But in the moment, what was the biggest mistake you made?
Wow. Oh my God, hang on. I got to lie down on a couch for that one. This mistake I made, my God. I have a feeling it was an accumulation of smaller mistakes. And I would guess it comes down to not having enough trust that they were on their right path. That when I look back now, they were always who they were. They were always doing the things that were right or were going to turn out to be right in some complicated way. And I just think about things that either I expressed concern about or I didn't even, but that I worried about. Like, your kid quits chorus and you're like, that's it. They're going to end up, whatever, living in a tent, at the edge of town. Like everything can feel so important. And I do think that if you're really paying attention to who they are, the things fall into place in really logical ways. When I look back, my kids were on their own time frames about certain things. They did certain kinds of experimenting with ways of interacting with us. And I just think it was all just totally part of the process. And I wish I had trusted that. I had a hunch that it was, but I didn't totally trust it.
I love what you said about practice saying, maybe I'm wrong about this.
Oh my God, right? That is saving my marriage. And I'm not even kidding. That maybe I'm wrong. It's like a revolutionary thing to say. It can actually just veer a pointless conversation in a completely different direction.
Much so. That and when you said, quoting your psychologist friend, the relationship is so much more important than being right. That is why do we think we have this struggle that we have to? Is it our self-esteem demands that we be right at the cost of a relationship? Have you thought about that? I wonder about that.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think some of us were, I spend a lot of time with a therapist, but and on our runs, what she tends to say is, the need to be right is already probably coming from a childhood injury of not feeling seen and heard, that we need to just lock in and be really noisy about our perspective instead of just feeling like, yeah, I know what I think. I'm curious about what you think. Let's meet in the middle. The locking in, I think, is a sign of a little bit of damage, to be honest.
I love what you said also about really just taking that moment to send one of our speakers once talked about how just when your child walks in the door, just their face will light up as our faces light up, and just give them that time. And so I love what you said about just take a minute and center yourself and realize that nothing else is going to be more important than this moment that I have right now. And maybe it's not the moment. Check with me in 10 minutes. Or hold that thought. That's whatever. That was really, really important. I haven't heard it said that way. Will you talk about the importance of role modeling that we hear all the time? Role modeling. What does that mean to you?
Well, the way I was thinking about it for this talk was, I think there's role modeling that sometimes sounds like a kind of performance your children are watching, that they're like sitting on the couch while you like have an important conversation with a friend, or like, say please and thank you, or send a condolence note. And all those are important things. But this in this context, the modeling is modeling actually in relationship with the kids. So it's a different thing. The kids aren't watching you do it. They are experiencing what it feels like to be in relationship with someone who's practicing some of the skills that, you know, you're ideally hoping they learn to practice.
And then similarly, if my partner is not listening in and I want them to sort of short of replaying this, which I hope people will do, but how can I best express some of these really important techniques that you talked about to a partner in a way that sounds, that will be best accepted by them?
What do you mean? Do you mean a partner who you think is screwing stuff up? Is that why you?
I've heard your talk. Now I'm enlightened, and there's just so much here about, again, in the moment, the relationship, the trust, the understanding, the getting the perspective that quitting choir is not going to be the end of the world, or whatever it might be. I want to share this in a way that will be heard by my wife, my partner, my husband, my partner. I want them to get some of this, and I want to present it in a way that will be best absorbed.
Okay. So how do you sum up like a 40-minute thing? I mean, I think
that's right.
There are some themes, obviously, like there's so much overlap, and a lot of it is about paying attention. I mean, it's probably the main theme is the kind of fundamental listening that enables you, that almost all the rest of the behaviors and skills come out of, right? That you listen deeply, and then you're able to take responsibility when you've done something wrong. You're able to express curiosity. You're able to really feel empathy for your kids. And the other thing that I think is just my kids just identify. You didn't ask the best thing I did as a parent. This is what my kids just identify as my best parenting thing, which I was like, oh my God, like 10 years from now, they'll be like, actually, we were wrong about that. But just said that, that I always made them feel like I enjoyed their company. And there are these sort of obvious things that turn out to be so fundamental to the way somebody feels about themselves. And I think thinking about, you know, you can't enjoy your kids' company every minute because there's conflict and there's, it's a dynamic family situation. There are times people are ill. There are just times that the home is chaotic, whatever, but that there's a basic level of kind of harmony that you can return to. I think that for me has been just a fundamental element of enjoying family.
That's a really beautiful point. I love what you said about curiosity, that this is something that we need to nurture now so that later they don't become that person. We all know that person who is never engaging, that I never thought about it in that way before. So that is a really important point. So I asked you what was the biggest mistake that you made. What do you think generally, when you look at parenting, I mean, what do you think is the biggest mistakes that parents today are making?
I don't know. What do you think? I don't know.
Well, I think it's probably what you said about the listening, you were all distracted. I love what you said about putting down the device as difficult as that is, but making them, I mentioned that Dr. June Lee is coming and with his work with early children, with the early child. You can't possibly, and it's not good to be every second turning yourself inside out, but that moment, and he shows a short video of a crossing guard in the morning as she's welcoming students to school. Now, how long is it? But the way that she's able to engage with those kids in that moment, it's really powerful. So I guess that's just, I think, an important point that you're making. So I just want to reiterate that. I think it's beautiful.
Yeah. And we hope that parents forgive themselves, and we don't know what people are going through.
That's so important, that forgiveness. So do you find yourself, are you a positive person? Are you staying positive? Sometimes it's a little, we can get down, but you seem very positive. And I guess, what keeps you positive?
Wow. My cats. I have my relationships, that's the thing. Like for me, it's all about my relationships, with my kids and my partner and my pets and my friends. And it's really just that. I am a basically nothing else matters kind of person.
We always, I think about Madeline Levine, who she would always remind us about loving the child in front of you. And I really feel like that's a theme of GPS, and your talk isn't, and what she says is not the child that you expected,
yes,
imagined, dreamt about, hoped for.
Oh my God. Yes, it's so true. My son, I have a 23-year-old son who does not like to read. I have had to wrestle with myself to just understand that he's just different from me.
Exactly.
I wouldn't have guessed that I would have a child who didn't like to read, but there it is. I respect him totally. And that's a real difference for me.
And there is just another takeaway. You're reminding me of one last one. I remember years ago, one of our speakers, I was struggling with a decision my child was making that was just so contrary to something that I would have made. And he said, we all get a square, Gilda. And he said, this is his square, and he needs to make the decisions for his square. I thought that was another good one.
Interesting.
Right? Well, you have given us so much this afternoon. I'm so grateful. Everybody who's listening, make a phone call, text someone. They have to hear this talk with Catherine Newman. It's a talk, 1 hour that could change everything. So thank you for that. Really appreciate it. This is where we say, go hug the kids. So that's what we're all going to do right now. And we're going to hug them even harder tonight because of your words. Thank you so much.
Children. Thanks everyone for coming. Really appreciate it.
Great to have you here. Have a good evening, everyone. Take care.